Thanks for coming back to this concluding video in my series on this Ranger playthrough of Skyrim Requiem. And I think my character has reached about where I want it to be. I've finished the main quest line in Dawnguard, which are the big barriers to completing the game. The only thing that's really left for me to do is Mirok in the Dragonborn content, and if there was enough demand to see that, I might go and revisit it. But really, I'm ready to start trying a new sort of build. This one has become extremely strong and there aren't very many enemies that are still interesting or a challenge. So I'm ready to move on to the next thing. Also, I want to do a big revamp of my load order as well as upgrading to Requiem version 3.2, and I try to only do those sorts of big changes when I'm starting a new character. So I thought I'd just give an overview of what I liked about this character, what I didn't like. I'll talk a little bit about the gear choices and the perks that I took and what I thought was really good and what was only so-so, and I'll give you an overall fun rating of doing a one-handed evasion Khajiit character like I did here. So I've got 52 or a little bit more hours into this character, and just at the top, I was pleasantly surprised by how powerful I became just using tempered weapons. When I started off the playthrough, I was a little bit concerned that by not using any enchanting or any alchemy and not using any werewolf, etc., that I'd be lagging in power in the late game. That turned out to really not be the case, and even with those restrictions, the only item that I crafted to use was the Dragonbone War Axe and a Dragonbone Bow, and I've been using the Hammerfell garb that I picked up around, level 7, all the way through the end of the game. So my gear has stayed pretty constant, and it's been plenty powerful and plenty strong to handle all the tough content at the end of Requiem. So first, just to talk a little bit about the weapon choices that I made. Because I invested into smithing and light armor, my bows ended up all being tempered for light armor, except for the Dragonbone bow, which is a heavy armored bow that you can temper, even going up the light armor side of the tree. And that ended up being, I think, overall a good decision. I had lots of really high quality arrows. At some points I missed the ability to temper the ebony weapons that I found. Like, I found a really good ebony war axe off of a vampire, but I wasn't able to use it because without tempering it was just going to be worse than my Dragonbone War Axe no matter what. And overall, I think the choice to play with axes was a really good one for doing a one-handed character. The other option would have been swords, and I did miss out on some really good enchanted swords, and stuff like Dawnbreaker would have been pretty nice to be using, but without the perks it just wasn't going to be as good. So I did miss out on a lot of the unique weapons that Requiem places, but axes are just so generically powerful that I think it was still the right decision. And having the Dawnguard rune axe as a payoff for choosing to use axes, even though you get it pretty late into the game, it's so powerful for handling the later stages like the Soul Cairn and getting through Skuldafn, that I think going one-handed axes is totally the way to go. I think that going one-hand maces would be kind of a mistake, because even though you get the Mace of Molag Bal, you don't have a good way to handle undead enemies, because as far as I know at least, there are no silver one-hand maces that are going to be good against vampires and stuff. So axes, I think, were awesome. They have a nice blend of being very high damage, some decent armor penetration, and also decent attack speed. Now, to talk a little bit about the character leveling and the perks that I took, I invested really heavily into alteration. I filled out the entire tree except for the empowered alterations perk, and I filled out almost the entire marksman tree except for the crossbow perks, and my one-handed ended up being in the 60s. It would have been nice to get it up to 75 to take another perk into war axes, but overall I think that would really only make a difference against stuff like the Ebony Warrior, where I needed the extra armor piercing, because damage and killing enemies was really not a problem that I ran into. And I think it's possible that I over-invested into archery. I was expecting going in that I would need that in order to fight dragons from range, but I found just by doing good blocking tactics, I was able to handle them up close as I got later into the game. So perhaps I didn't need quite as much archery as I invested in. On the other hand, I wish I had gone deeper into block and leveled that up faster and put a little bit more emphasis on getting points into that, because my block ended up being in the 50s and it took me a long time to get it that far. I was going through with pretty low block for most of the game, and it would have been helpful to have those perks sooner, especially the one you get at 75, which makes it so you can move faster while blocking. That would have been awesome to have. I never ended up being able to get it. So if I were doing this again, I probably would have done a little bit less archery and put more faith into my one-handed and shield strategy and just invested more strongly in that, because archery, while it was pretty helpful early in the game, it didn't end up being all that necessary as I got further on. And I think the power of this character really benefited from the focus that I had in picking perks. I didn't spread out across very many trees. There was no real thief perks that I took. I didn't invest into stealth. And I think that the reason that I was able to get through this content and finish it in the late 40s of character level is because my perks were pretty well focused. So what about the overall fun rating of playing a one-handed evasion character, particularly a Khajiit? I'd call it pretty high. Having high move speed and good damage makes combat pretty exciting and engaging, and I was able to handle enemies, the early level ones I was able to start taking out with ease quite quickly, and even the higher level ones I was able to take on pretty well also. And the main weakness of the character is that it didn't have all that much in the way of health. Supposing I went into Werewolf from the Companions questline, that would have helped quite a bit there, but I was still a little bit fragile up until I got into the late 40s and had really excellent mage armor, which complements light armor in a big way. It makes it almost as protective as heavy armor, but you get better move speed to avoid attacks. So I think doing a one-handed evasion Khajiit is an awesome way to do the build. The high move speed makes it so you can close distance quickly with enemies, and even though the Khajiit racial power is pretty weak, it's made up for by that good move speed. And so I was overall pretty happy with the flexibility I had of switching between ranged and melee. The one thing I didn't particularly like about this build is it started to feel rather simplistic toward the end. Once I got the spacing down for my running power attacks, that's the main move I was using in combat, and while, don't get me wrong, that is a lot of fun. It's a great way to get the first hit in against enemies and often knock them out of the fight. It does limit the long-term enjoyment of the build a little bit because it starts to feel sort of one-dimensional when the only choice I'm really making is which axe I want to use, whether it's versus undead or generic enemies, and making sure that I keep my alteration buff up. So I would call this an excellent build if you're kind of in middle level of experience with Requiem and Skyrim in general, because it's pretty easy to play, and you can make it considerably more powerful if you decide to invest in some enchanting or some alchemy. That could have made my character a lot stronger than it was. And because I put some self-restrictions on the gear I could have, I was limited in my ability to upgrade gear, but not everyone has to play that way. So that's what I thought about this build. I had a really good time playing it. I might return to it at some point in the future, but I'm planning to start up a mage character next. I'm going to create some videos on that as well. So to keep following along as I post new videos, please do hit the subscribe button and let me know if you have any suggestions or ideas on what you'd like to see next. Thanks.